Hey guys, tonight we begin with something far darker than a ghost story. We dive into a time of plagues, punishments, and perpetual suffering. We're diving into what life was really like during the Middle Ages. Forget the romanticized castles, the shining armor, and the chivalry Hollywood sold you. That was a fantasy spun by the wealthy few. The truth, the brutal, unvarnished truth of the peasant's life, is that you probably wouldn't last a single day. The sheer, relentless misery would crush you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Congratulations, you've just been thrust, gasping, into the year 1325. The good news? You're alive. The bad news? So are the fleas, the lice, and a million other parasitic companions. The very first moment of your medieval day is an absolute assault on the senses. Your bed is a half-rotted straw mattress, a palliasse, stuffed with last season's hay and layered with bugs that are already feasting on you. This straw is the same straw that might have been spread on a barn floor just 3 months ago. It is damp, it is crunchy, and it is a biological zoo. There is no memory foam, no pillows, and absolutely no Egyptian cotton. Just a rough wool blanket that hasn't been washed since last winter and now weighs roughly as much as a small cow from the accumulated grime, sweat, and spilled ale. You blink awake as the great church bell clangs in the distance. It's the medieval version of an alarm clock, only louder, more menacing, and somehow even less merciful. It tolls not just the time, but the very order of your life, reminding you that your soul and your body are equally accountable to powers far greater than yourself. Your home is a small, single-room wooden hut, often built from a rough timber frame filled in with wattle and daub, a mixture of wet mud, straw, and dung. It has no windows, or perhaps just a tiny, shuttered opening covered with oilcloth or animal bladder to keep out the worst of the elements, not glass. Your floor is simply packed dirt, occasionally mixed with rushes or more straw that just serve as a new, temporary breeding ground for filth. It is the original open-concept floor plan, a charming space where your entire family, your domestic insects, and any smaller livestock, a hen, a goat, or a piglet, all share the same suffocating space. And the smell. Oh, the smell. It is a fragrant symphony of suffering, a subtle, yet powerful blend of stale, low-alcohol beer, perpetual human sweat, the sharp, musky odor of the goat in the corner, and a deep, sour, pervasive stench that you pray isn't mold, but know in your soul probably is. Scented candles haven't been invented, and even if they were, they just melt into the dirt floor and coat the air in a temporary layer of expensive sweetness, unable to mask the true, abiding stench of your life. Every breath you take is a confirmation of your poverty. You try to stretch, but immediately regret the impulse because the air is freezing, even in the middle of a non-winter day, and your joints ache with a pain that belies your years. You're only 22 years old, but in medieval terms, you're roughly middle-aged. Your spine cracks like an old, desiccated wooden door, and your knees sound like a bag of rocks being shaken by a confused peasant. The hard labor and poor diet have aged you a decade for every 5 years you've actually lived. Getting out of your straw nest is a gamble. The dirt floor is either wet from last night's rain, which leaks freely through the badly maintained thatched roof, or it's crusty from something your neighbor's chicken or your own family member did. Either way, your bare feet are now part of the ecosystem, permanently cold, permanently damp, and immediately exposed to the microbial soup of your dwelling. And privacy, what is that? It is a luxury afforded only to the dead. Your entire family, mother, father, siblings, perhaps a random cousin who just never quite left, are all waking up beside you. There is no bedroom, no curtains, no moment of quiet reflection, no me time. There is only communal everything. Every cough, every sigh, every private moment is public. The constant noise, the shared air, the sheer, unavoidable presence of others. It is a weight that presses down on you before the day even begins. You are never truly alone, not because of a need for companionship, but because parasites, rodents, and 8 other people are always, inescapably, with you. This immediate, suffocating sensory overload is just how your day starts. It only, and inevitably, gets worse from here. The filth is not a temporary lapse. It is the defining feature of your existence, a constant, gnawing reminder that you are at the bottom of a brutal social order, where the only thing cheaper than your labor is the roof over your head. The sun is now a thin, watery promise through the cracks in the wall. The bell tolls again. The day begins. You've survived the crawl out of your medieval haystack of horrors. Congratulations. Now nature calls, and it's not calling politely. It's screaming a deep, physiological bellow of urgent necessity. This is the moment you begin to genuinely miss the gleaming porcelain and flowing water of the modern bathroom. There's no toilet, no seat, no toilet paper, no flush, not even a mildly resentful plunger tucked in a corner. In the 14th century, relieving yourself is not a private moment of respite. It is an adventure, a shared social experiment, and often a small, deeply humiliating public event. If you are a peasant, your bathroom is likely a simple wooden bucket, a chamber pot, kept somewhere near the back of the house, perhaps behind a thin curtain of hemp or a stack of firewood. This bucket is almost certainly already full because Uncle Wolfstan had a rough night after eating bad turnips and watered-down ale. The smell, even before you add to it, is overwhelming, biblical in its concentrated offense. You hold your breath, you do your business as quickly and efficiently as possible, and then comes the kicker, the moment that defines medieval urban living. You must toss it into the street. Yes, the street. You are culturally and legally supposed to shout a warning, something like Gardyloo, before emptying the contents out the window. Gardyloo is an ancient French warning meaning watch out below, or perhaps more accurately, God guard you. Although this custom was technically in place, frankly, no one ever moves fast enough, and the warning is often ignored or shouted too late. The result is that the streets of medieval towns are not just dirty. They are open sewers, charming rivers of human and animal waste, refuse, and mystery liquids you would rather not examine. This filth, this microbial soup, wasn't just disgusting. It was a constant, low-grade source of illness that guaranteed disease would circulate through the population, a visible testament to the era's lethal lack of sanitation. This accepted impurity was often even given a cultural pass. Unlike the Roman world, where bathing and clean sanitation were marks of civilization, medieval thought sometimes viewed filth as a mark of humility and a rejection of worldly decadence, ironically linking godliness to grime. If you are fortunate enough to live in a larger town that boasts communal sanitation, you get to sit shoulder to shoulder with strangers in a public latrine. Privacy is a myth here. These were often multi-seater outhouses built over a flowing river or a deep cesspit. You might make small talk with the stranger beside you, exchanging gossip or perhaps discussing the latest religious miracle, but you try desperately not to breathe too deeply. Ventilation in these places is a cruel joke, and the social awkwardness is compounded by the persistent, suffocating stench. And toilet paper? Never heard of it. The average person cleanses themselves with whatever is at hand. Straw, handfuls of leaves, discarded rags, moss, or maybe, if they were feeling especially indulgent, a scrap of discarded wool. Sometimes, nothing at all. This lack of proper cleansing and the necessity of using whatever was available explains a lot about the culture, particularly why the custom of shaking hands was slow to gain universal traction. But surely, the nobility in a castle fared better? Well, sort of. They often had a garderobe. The name is literally derived from the French garde-robe, meaning to guard the robes. The theory was that the ammonia fumes from the human waste that collected beneath it would repel fleas and moths, thus protecting the expensive, thick wool clothing hung in the small adjoining closet. A garderobe was a simple stone seat with a hole that dropped the waste directly down the length of the castle wall and into the moat or a waiting cesspit. It was a sign of status, yet simultaneously a colossal design flaw. The moat, which was supposed to be a defensive measure, quickly became a septic trench of indescribable odor. Worse, Enemies sometimes knew this weakness, and attackers occasionally climbed in through the waste chute itself, bypassing the heavily fortified front gates. Talk about entering through the back door and using a literal river of sewage as cover. The castle, for all its stone and might, was internally compromised by its own waste system. So, whether you're a dirt farmer or a great baron, medieval toileting is a ritual of humiliation and hazard. It's cold, it's public, it's dangerous, and it is never, ever not disgusting. One slip on a wet stone path, or simply a wrong step outside your door, and you are face first in humanity's leftovers. And you still haven't brushed your teeth, but first, you have to face the day's work with the full knowledge that the street outside your door is literally trying to poison you. You survived the bucket and the contaminated street. You deserve a reward, right? Perhaps a nice breakfast. Something warm, delicious, comforting, a moment of reprieve. Sorry, this is medieval Europe. Nothing here is comforting, and certainly not the morning meal. Breakfast, if you can even call it that, is a grim, perfunctory affair. There are no eggs Benedict, no coffee machines sputtering awake with the promise of caffeine, and absolutely no avocado toast. You sit down, or more likely squat, near the smoking embers of the fire to a wooden bowl of something that looks like it was scraped off a muddy boot. Welcome to your daily, uninspiring ration of pottage. Pottage is the cornerstone of the peasant diet, a thick, gloopy stew made of whatever you can find and whatever is cheap. Grains, root vegetables like turnips or parsnips, maybe some beans or peas if the harvest was generous. It's less of a recipe and more of an ongoing edible experiment. The master pot, often a blackened iron cauldron hung over the fire, has been simmering for days, sometimes weeks. New ingredients are simply dumped on top of the old ones, creating a cumulative, ever-evolving sludge where the flavor profile is aggressively earthy and aggressively old. The nutritional value is minimal, but its bulk is essential for surviving the day's labor. On the side, you receive a hunk of bread so hard it could deflect arrows. This is the staff of life for the common person, but it is not the fluffy white bread of the nobles. It is made from coarse, dark flour, usually rye or barley, as fine wheat flour is a rich man's fantasy, reserved for Sunday mass wafers and the tables of the manor. This loaf is not your friend. You don't slice it, you negotiate with it, often using a knife or your own body weight to break off a manageable chunk. Worse still, in years of bad harvests, a regular occurrence in this climate, desperate bakers and peasants bulk up the flour with filler materials, sawdust, ground-up acorns, chaff, or even clay. This gritty composition means every bite is an abrasive act, contributing to dental wear and chronic stomach trouble. But the hidden danger is even more sinister. In rye fields, a fungus called ergot sometimes grows. Consuming this fungus, which is often inadvertently ground into the flour, causes ergotism, or St. Anthony's fire. This lethal condition brings agonizing symptoms, convulsions, burning sensations in the limbs, hallucinations, and eventual death. Your daily bread, the very thing keeping you alive, could be slowly poisoning you with a medieval mix of gangrene and LSD-like madness. What about drinks? You're not sipping orange juice or an oat milk latte. You're drinking beer. Yes, beer, and it is 6 a.m. The reason is simple and terrifying. The water is teeming with parasites and filth, as established in Part 2. Drinking untreated water is a death sentence. Brewing small beer, a weak, low-alcohol ale, requires boiling the water, a process that makes it exponentially safer than what flows through the town ditch. Everyone drinks it, men, women, and even children. It's not a celebration. It's a necessary, high-survivability liquid lunch. It is low in alcohol content, often less than 1%, but high in essential calories and, crucially, safety. Wine is another option, but only if you are rich enough to afford imported goods and unconcerned with remaining functional before noon. Want some meat, or perhaps a nice cheese? Dream on. That is reserved for Sundays, major saints' feast days, and only if your lord is feeling benevolent enough to host a celebratory distribution. Most peasants don't eat meat more than a few times a year. It is an expensive, difficult to preserve luxury. As for fresh fruit, it's only available when strictly in season and usually already fermented into wine. And don't even think about spices. A pinch of black pepper, cinnamon, or nutmeg costs more than your monthly wages, traveling along the Silk Road through dozens of taxing intermediaries. Salt, too, is a highly valuable commodity, often locked away by the household head and used sparingly for curing meat or flavoring. For the average person, flavor comes from onions, garlic, and a lingering sourness of the pot itself. So, you chew your gritty, suspect bread, gulp down your watery, medieval beer, and try not to think about the rat that may have nibbled your porridge overnight. Breakfast doesn't energize you. It merely happens to you, providing just enough fuel to avoid immediate collapse. And now that you are properly underfed, slightly tipsy, and marginally sustained, it's time to work like your life depends on it, because it absolutely does. You've swallowed your sad medieval breakfast, and now it's time for the daily humiliation of getting dressed. Not that it will help. Your wardrobe is an agonizing testament to the era's scarcity, consisting of exactly one outfit. This is not a matter of fashion choice. It is a matter of pure economic reality. Your single ensemble is a rough wool tunic or a linen shift that you have worn, sweated in, worked in, and slept in every single day for months, possibly years. There is no such thing as seasonal fashion. Only wear this until it disintegrates or gives you a fungal infection. Beneath the outer layer, underwear is truly optional. If you are extremely lucky, you might possess a simple linen undertunic, a necessary barrier against the sheer scratchiness of the coarse wool. If you're not lucky, you're going commando beneath layers of stiff, sweaty wool, all lovingly stitched together by someone who is likely too illiterate and exhausted to care what a proper seam was supposed to look like. There is no washing machine, no perfumed soap, and absolutely no dry cleaner in sight. Your clothes are perpetually stained, stiff with accumulated bodily oils, and scented like a compost pile that has been left to marinate in a pigsty. The very smell of you is the smell of your social class. Even if you yearn for cleanliness, washing your garments is a monumental task, a full-day production reserved for the absolute depths of winter. You'd have to haul precious water from the river or well, heat it over a fire you barely have fuel for, and scrub your heavy tunic on a board using abrasive ashes or harsh, alkaline lye, made from boiling wood ash. It would then need to be hung in the sun, which is a rare, fleeting presence in the perpetually damp northern European climate. And don't even begin to contemplate shoes. If you own any, they're untreated leather, barely stitched together, and offer as much arch support as a banana peel. They soak up water and harden like boards, making every step an exercise in developing blisters and calluses. Most peasants simply go barefoot through mud, through dung, through medieval landmines, sharp rocks, animal waste, and disease puddles. The constant exposure guarantees cuts, infections, and chronic chilling. All this means one terrible, inescapable truth. Your skin hates you. You itch constantly. Fleas, lice, and bedbugs live rent-free, thriving in the seams of your clothes and the straw of your mattress. Everyone has them. Nobles, wandering monks, and itchy children alike. You are a walking, breathing insect farm. You might be scratching your armpit with a wooden spoon while receiving communion from the local priest, and no one will even bat an eye because they're likely doing the exact same thing a moment later. It is a shared, universal misery. Your skin is raw from the perpetual rubbing. Your scalp is a constant battlefield of bites and scabs. If you develop a rash or a weeping sore or a persistent inflammation known today as scabies, caused by mites burrowing under the skin, too bad. There is no dermatologist, no hydrocortisone. The best cure you might get is a prayer, a dubious herbal balm, or simply enduring the agony. If you are lucky enough to escape a full-blown infection that turns septic, the rash will simply accompany you for the next 6 months like an unwanted, irritating medieval sidekick. This constant, low-grade physical distress, the scratch of the wool, the damp chill, the itching pests, is more than discomfort. It is a profound psychological toll. It reduces your capacity for joy, heightens your stress, and keeps your mind focused exclusively on the physical reality of survival. Wrapped in misery, swaddled in discomfort, it's now time to head outside. The real work, the work that will break your back and wear down your teeth, is just getting started. Now that you're fully dressed in your damp wool and wrapped in a cloud of pestilence, it's time to flash that morning smile. Except you don't, because in the Middle Ages, smiling is less a sign of joy and more a dangerous game. Not emotionally, but dentally. The reality is stark. There is no toothbrush, no toothpaste, no mouthwash, and certainly no floss. The very concept of oral hygiene is about as popular as bathing, which is to say, not at all. Some individuals might chew on a soft twig or rinse their mouths with wine or vinegar. The acidity temporarily cuts through the grime. But for the most part, your teeth are entirely on their own, and they are failing miserably. By the time you hit your mid-20s, your smile looks like something pulled from a haunted crypt. Cavities are rampant, not just from sugar, but from the sheer grit in your peasant bread. Gums are swollen, perpetually bleeding from hard chewing. And those aren't just food stains on your teeth. That's decay. You have more rot in your mouth than a medieval root cellar. The constant chewing of the coarse rye and barley bread, often mixed with sand or grit from poor milling, acts like a slow-motion grinding stone, wearing down the enamel and opening the teeth up to infection. Ironically, the wealthy often suffered from decay at an even faster rate. While the peasant's teeth were worn down by abrasion, the noble's teeth were destroyed by sugar. Imported at great cost, sugar was used lavishly in small cakes, sweet wines, and preserves to show off wealth. If you were rich, congratulations. You got to rot your teeth faster and blacker than the peasants, a visible sign of your luxury and inevitable pain. Toothaches, get used to them. They're like medieval weather, always there in the background, a dull, throbbing pain that flares into crippling agony without warning. This is the kind of pain that makes you consider praying, drinking yourself unconscious, or taking the tooth out yourself with a rusty tool. And that last option is often the only available treatment. Dentists didn't really exist. What you had were barber-surgeons. Yes, the same guy who cuts your hair and perhaps bleeds you for a fever is also the one pulling your molars out. The scene is one of pure terror. A dimly lit hut, a rough wooden chair, a pair of horrifyingly large iron pliers, or a curved hook, and zero anesthesia, unless you count the patient passing out from shock. An infected tooth is an immediate death sentence waiting to happen. Without antibiotics, a simple abscess can easily turn into a life-threatening, spreading infection or sepsis. The same ailment that sends a modern person to the pharmacy for a prescription could be your funeral in the 1300s. A simple dental infection was one of the common and unglamorous pathways to an early grave. There is no relief on the social front either. Halitosis, bad breath, is everywhere, an inescapable consequence of rot, fermented ale, and poor digestion. If you're single, you're not judged by your smile. You're judged by your land, your livestock, and your capacity for labor. Your mouth, in short, is a constant battlefield, and it is losing the war every single day. Now that your teeth are throbbing and your breath could peel paint, it's time to head outside. The real job, the one that will ultimately break your back and define your entire existence, is just getting started. Time to head to work. Except there is no office, no desk, no coffee break, and virtually no chance of promotion or upward mobility. Your job, if you're like 90% of the population, is simple. Don't die while laboring for someone else's comfort. You are a peasant, specifically a serf tied to the land. Congratulations. This means you work the land that belongs, legally and absolutely, to a noble lord who likely doesn't remember your name and has never met your children. This entire social structure, the invisible engine of your misery, is the feudal system. The day runs from sunrise to sunset. You stop only when the light disappears behind the trees or when the church bell tolls the end of the day. There is no weekend. There is no clocking out. There is only sunrise to sunset, 6 days a week, week after week. Sunday is supposedly off for mass and rest, but often you are still harvesting, fighting off raiders, or praying feverishly for your infected toe to stop turning black. The work is unrelenting and brutal. The fields are plowed by hand, or perhaps with a team of oxen if your village is collectively wealthy enough to afford one. Your tools are painfully primitive: a simple wooden hoe, a rusty sickle, a heavy spade, and the bones and muscle of your own body. You dig ditches, sow seeds, pull weeds, and carry heavy loads of water and manure until your spine begins to resemble the letter S. There is no mechanization. Every calorie burned comes directly from your own limited, meager stores. No one cares if you're tired. No one is asking how your mental health is doing. If you falter, there's a whole wretched pool of other peasants waiting to take your place. This system ensures that you are constantly giving away the fruits of your labor. The Lord extracts his wealth through various fees. Rent/dues. You owe the Lord a portion of everything you grow, often a third or more of your crop. Corvée labor. You owe the Lord a certain number of days of unpaid labor, working his domain, his private land, before you can touch your own. This is forced overtime with no compensation. Banalites. You must pay a fee to use the Lord's essential monopolies: his mill to grind your grain, his oven to bake your bread, and his wine press. This ensures that every necessary step of your food preparation costs you time, money, and power. If you are a woman, the burden is doubled. You don't just endure the same crushing field work. You also manage the entire domestic sphere. You care for children, often several simultaneously. Clean, cook the pottage, spin wool in a thread, feed the animals, and attempt to maintain some semblance of order in a lice-ridden hut, all while ignoring the fact that your husband's flea infestation is slowly migrating to your side of the shared bed. Children are not immune. They start helping out around age 5. There is no school, no extended childhood, no toys, just a tiny wooden rake and a dream of one day not dying of the flu. Their labor is immediately valuable. Their small bodies put to work pulling weeds and scaring birds. And if you're one of the few who isn't a farmer, a blacksmith, a tanner, or a cooper, great. You still work with fire, toxic chemicals like urine in the tanning process, or animal guts all day in poorly ventilated sheds. The pay is survival. The perks are occasional bleeding and chronic pain. Break a bone? Too bad. Get a fever? Drink some warm beer and keep going. You cannot afford to stop, not even for a day. Because if you don't work, you don't eat. And if you don't eat, medieval Europe has a brutal solution for that: replacement. So, you grip your shovel, ignore the burning blisters and the searing pain in your lower back, and keep digging. Because in the Middle Ages, your job isn't a career. It is a slow-motion endurance test against poverty and famine. Now that your back is on fire from laboring in the fields, let's talk about the weather. Because in the Middle Ages, temperature is less about seasons and more about an ongoing, indiscriminate punishment delivered by the sky. For the peasant, the climate wasn't just an inconvenience. It was the second great antagonist after the Lord. Let's begin with winter. There is no insulation, no central heating, and certainly no weatherproofing. Your hut is essentially a wooden shell with gaps in the wattle and daub walls you could practically throw a small chicken through. Your tiny windows, covered with cloth or parchment, not glass, offer little barrier. The only source of warmth is the fire in the hearth, but keeping it going is a brutal logistical challenge. Wood is expensive and scarce. Gathering it from the forest is often illegal. You could be executed for poaching firewood from the Lord's woods. The risk of being caught with a handful of illegally gathered sticks sometimes outweighed the risk of freezing. You bundle up in your one damp, itchy wool tunic, huddle near the dying embers, and still wake up with your nose frozen and your breath clouding the air. Your feet are permanently cold, often damp, and your fingers are so stiff they feel like tiny medieval popsicles. Frostbite isn't diagnosed. It's just called bad luck or God's will. The constant dampness inside the hut promotes respiratory illnesses like pneumonia and bronchitis, which sweep through families, often killing the youngest and the oldest without mercy. But the cold also serves a larger, more menacing historical purpose. This period was heavily influenced by the Little Ice Age, a span of time characterized by colder, wetter, and less predictable weather patterns. The dampness and shorter growing seasons meant fewer successful harvests. Now, fast forward to summer. Sounds better, right? Wrong. In summer, your hut turns into a claustrophobic clay oven. There is no fan, no cross breeze, and absolutely no deodorant. You sweat through your single layer, but you can't simply strip down. Showing too much skin is scandalous, inviting social judgment, and, practically speaking, exposing you to vicious insect bites and severe sunburn, which could be crippling in a time when you couldn't afford a day off. The flies are out in full, buzzing force, attracted by your unwashed body and the stench of last week's goat stew that's still fermenting in the corner. Mosquitoes buzz mercilessly by your ear while you try to sleep, assuming you can even sleep through the sound of your neighbors yelling, dogs barking, and babies crying. In the fields, the sun bakes you. There is no sunblock. Your only hat is one you painstakingly fashioned out of straw, like a desperate scarecrow. Heat stroke isn't diagnosed. It's simply called taking a bad turn. The intense labor in the high summer heat leads to profound dehydration and mineral loss, often exacerbated by drinking low-quality ale instead of clean water. Your thighs chafe into oblivion, creating raw wounds that easily become infected by the dust and filth of the field. The weather is never neutral. It is always actively fighting you. You are either shivering in your own hovel, wondering if your toes will make it to spring, or you're sweating through your only pair of socks while battling a relentless swarm of insects. The constant struggle against nature adds a profound psychological layer to your poverty. Famine is always just one bad winter or one prolonged summer drought away. For the peasant, control over the climate, and by extension, control over one's own destiny, is an impossible dream. This is climate control, medieval style. There is none. Feeling thirsty? Need to freshen up? Want to splash a little water on your face to wake up from this damp, flea-ridden fever dream of a life? Too bad. In medieval times, water isn't your friend. It is an agent actively trying to murder you quietly. Let's reiterate the danger of drinking. The nearby stream may look fresh, bubbling, and clear like something out of a romantic fantasy. But upstream, someone, perhaps a fuller, a tanner, or a neighbor, just dumped a chamber pot or a vat of animal guts into it. If not that, then a dead pig or a rotting corpse is probably decomposing in it. Parasites, bacteria, and the entire microbial army of medieval Europe await in every sip. As discussed, this is why people drank small beer or wine. The brewing and fermentation process purified the water, making a safer, if slightly inebriating, alternative to the lethal liquid flowing through the town ditch. What about bathing? Surely water was used for cleaning the body. In theory, yes. In practice, absolutely not. A peculiar but deeply held belief dominated medieval thought, particularly among the educated and wealthy. The idea that bathing actually opened your pores and let disease into the body. That's right. Washing yourself was considered medically risky. You were supposedly cleaner and healthier if you never removed the protective, caked layer of filth on your skin, which acted as a physical barrier against bad air or miasmas, the perceived source of disease. This medical theory stemmed from the dominant ancient Greek and Roman philosophy of the Galenic humoral theory. This system dictated that all health and illness were governed by the balance of four primary bodily fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. If you were sick, your humors were out of balance. Got a fever? Too much blood. The universally accepted answer? Bloodletting. This involved draining your precious life force into a bowl using a dull blade, or more commonly, a batch of hungry, medicinal leeches. Barbers, often the ones performing this gruesome task, were considered semi-medical practitioners. Imagine getting a haircut and a potentially fatal hemoglobin extraction in one bloody sitting. Feeling sad or lethargic. That's clearly an excess of black bile. The cure? Aggressive laxatives, perhaps a warm herbal purge, or just prayers and a cold compress while everyone starts preparing for your demise. If you break a bone or get a nasty wound, you are in real trouble. There is no understanding of germs. They believe disease comes from bad air or God being annoyed with your moral failings. Surgery is done with knives that haven't been cleaned since the Crusades. The tools are heated over a fire, not for sterilization, but because they just look scarier that way. Anesthesia is centuries away. The most you can hope for is passing out from the sheer, overwhelming agony. The remedies themselves are a testament to desperation. Crushed beetles, mixtures of wine and dung, or potent herbal opiates that often simply hasten the end. If your condition worsens, the final treatment is a priest at your bedside, administering last rites. At this point, they are preparing for the ultimate cure, which is death. In the Middle Ages, medicine is less about healing and more about simply surviving the cure. Next time you sip tap water, raise a glass for our ancestors. They didn't have the luxury of hydration without hazard. After a long day of labor, lice, leeches, and surviving the constant threat of infection, it's finally evening. You shuffle back to your hovel, stomach growling, ready for the one simple solace left in life. A brief, warm meal followed by sleep. But do not get too relaxed because God is watching. So is the priest, and so is your neighbor Agnes, who will absolutely rat you out if you miss Vespers. In medieval Europe, religion isn't just a part of life, it is life. The Holy Catholic Church is not merely an institution. It is your ultimate landlord, magistrate, social worker, and historian. It controls your calendar, dictates your laws, structures your education, if you're lucky enough to have any, and governs your birth, marriage, death, and everything in between. Think of it as your spiritual sovereign, and you are perpetually behind on your rent. Every day is structured around the canonical hours, marked by the relentless ringing of the town church bell. Matins, lauds prime, terce, sext, none, vespers, and compline. It tolls not just because people need reminders, but because missing prayer is a sin. Forget to bow? Sin. Eat meat on a Friday outside of a sanctioned feast day? Sin. Think about your neighbor's wife in a dream? Double sin, potentially leading to confession and public penance. The spiritual pressure is immense because hell is vividly, terrifyingly real. Priests describe in glorious, horrific detail rivers of fire, lakes of boiling blood, demons with pitchforks, and eternal wailing. The architecture itself reinforces this fear. The soaring heights and dark, immense spaces of the great Gothic cathedrals were designed to inspire overwhelming awe and terror in the illiterate peasant, making them feel tiny and utterly dependent on the church for salvation. If the plague doesn't scare you, the certainty of eternal damnation definitely will. You cannot read the Bible yourself because it is written in Latin, a liturgical language reserved for the clergy and educated elites. You rely entirely on the church to interpret everything for you, including God's will. This means that if the priest says your crop failure is because you didn't pray hard enough or committed a hidden sin, well, you must kneel harder and offer more. The church's financial grip is as strong as its spiritual one. Tithes, a mandatory tenth of everything you own, are due. If you grow wheat, you give wheat. If you raise chickens, you give eggs. If you have nothing, you are spiritually bankrupt and financially doomed, often forced to work extra days just to pay your religious dues. Failure to pay tithes or follow religious law can result in excommunication, a total social death sentence where you are shunned by your community, denied the sacraments, and left with the chilling certainty of eternal damnation. Holidays are holy days, dozens of them throughout the year. While they do offer mandatory breaks from field labor, they are not for leisure or fun. They are strictly for attending Mass, fasting, confessing sins, and reminding yourself that earthly joy is a dangerous, fleeting indulgence. Questioning the church is dangerous. Heretics are persecuted and often burned. Accused witches are drowned. Blasphemers are publicly flogged. Skeptics are quickly, often violently, reformed. So, you go through the motions. You chant. You bow. You pray that your soul, after enduring this dirt-covered life, might finally land in paradise, assuming the priest likes you enough to give you a favorable final blessing. Because in the Middle Ages, God may be merciful, but the church, which acts as his gatekeeper on earth, is almost always calculating and ruthlessly effective. If you thought being a medieval peasant was rough, try doing it as a woman. You face all the filth, famine, and fear of your male counterparts, plus the added gauntlets of childbirth, subservience, and social invisibility. In the Middle Ages, being a woman is like playing life on hard mode with no health potions and no restart button. From birth, a girl's path is rigidly locked in. Her value is tied to her domestic skills and her reproductive capacity. Marriage happens early. It's not uncommon to be betrothed at 12 and pregnant by 14. This is not about love. It's about merging land, aligning family alliances, and, most critically, producing legitimate heirs. Your opinion is not required. Once married, you are legally and socially your husband's property, expected to endure, obey, reproduce, and suffer in silence. Childbirth is a death lottery. There is no prenatal care, no sterile tools, and no anesthesia. Midwives, often the only medical professionals women ever saw, did their best with herbal knowledge and prayer, but even minor complications, a retained placenta, puerperal fever, meant death for the mother, the child, or both. Women often survived 10 pregnancies, but only brought 3 or 4 children to adulthood, and their own lifespan was often cut short by the sheer strain of repeated gestation. This constant proximity to life and death, combined with their traditional knowledge of herbs and healing, made women simultaneously essential and deeply vulnerable. Women who did not conform, those who were outspoken, widowed and independent, or possessed herbal knowledge, were frequently branded as witches or heretics. That label came with a complimentary, terrifying ticket to a public trial and execution. This brings us to the overarching threat of violence and the horrifying nature of medieval justice. The idea of law and order mostly meant hoping the local lord wasn't having a bad day. Violence is pervasive. In the home, husbands were permitted to physically discipline their wives and children in the streets and on the battlefields. When accused of a serious crime, you didn't get a jury. You got a spectacle. You were subjected to the trial by ordeal, a system based on the belief that God would intervene to protect the innocent. One version, ordeal by hot water. You thrust your hand into boiling water to retrieve a stone. If the wound healed cleanly in 3 days, you were innocent. If not, you were guilty. Another, perhaps more common in water-rich areas, ordeal by cold water. You were bound and tossed into a river. If you sank, you were innocent and probably drowned. If you floated, you were guilty because the pure water rejected your impure soul and would be punished anyway. It was a cruel medieval game show where the prize was survival and the host was actively rooting against you. If sentenced to death, the execution was a public event. Hangings, beheadings, burnings, performed in front of cheering crowds, often bringing snacks for the afternoon's entertainment. Justice was arbitrary, brutal, and more of a deterrent performance than a search for truth. At this point, you've endured the lice, the leeches, the laundry-less misery, and the looming threat of public disembowelment. But now comes the final, unglamorous chapter, early death. If you're still alive and breathing past the age of 40, you're practically a celebrity, often referred to as the old one. The average life expectancy hovers around 30 to 40 years, but this number is heavily skewed by the horrific infant mortality rate. Nearly half of all children died before reaching age 5 from disease, malnutrition, or one bad winter. If you survived childhood, you entered adulthood already physically exhausted. By 25, your joints creaked, your teeth were rotting, and your body was ravaged by chronic disease.